At 24, Belle Torn had mastered the art of surviving on 3 hours of sleep. Her phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m., displaying 17 missed calls from her stepmother, Patricia. The voicemail was predictable. "Belle, honey, your father's medication copay went up again. Can you help us out? Just this once, I promise." Just this once. Belle had heard those words so many times they'd lost all meaning. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her studio apartment bathroom, noting the dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide anymore. In 6 hours, she'd be starting her first job of the day at Morrison's diner. In 12 hours, she'd be clocking into her evening shift at DataCore Solutions. And somewhere between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., she'd be driving her beat-up Honda Civic across town to clean offices at Pinnacle Business Complex. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, all so her family could keep their house in Maple Ridge, pay for her father's treatments, and maintain the comfortable middle-class life they'd grown accustomed to before his stroke 3 years ago. But comfortable for who? Belle splashed cold water on her face and grabbed her work uniform from the chair. Another 16-hour day was about to begin, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a question she'd been suppressing for months began to surface. When would it be enough? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights at Morrison's diner hummed with the same monotonous frequency as Belle's life had for the past 2 years. She tied her apron strings with practiced efficiency, muscle memory guiding her movements as her mind wandered to the growing stack of bills on her kitchen counter. Rent was due in 5 days, and after sending her latest paycheck home to Maple Ridge, she had exactly $127 to her name. "Morning, sunshine," called out Marcus Rivera, the night shift cook who always stayed an extra hour to help with the breakfast rush. His genuine smile was one of the few bright spots in Bill's routine. Unlike her family, Marcus never asked for anything beyond friendship and the occasional shared complaint about difficult customers. "Morning, Marcus. How's your daughter doing with her college applications?" Belle asked, tying her hair back into the regulation ponytail that had become her signature look. She'd given up on styling her naturally curly brown hair months ago. There simply wasn't time between shifts. "Elena got into State University with a partial scholarship," Marcus beamed, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Still need to cover room and board, but we'll make it work. She's going to be the first Rivera to graduate college." Belle felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Jealousy? Regret? She'd been accepted to State University, too, 4 years ago, with a full academic scholarship for journalism. The acceptance letter was still tucked away in her childhood bedroom at her father's house, a reminder of the life she'd planned before everything changed. The morning rush began at exactly 6:30 a.m., as reliable as clockwork. Construction workers grabbing coffee and egg sandwiches before their shifts, nurses ending their night rotations with comfort food, and business people who'd rather pay $4.50 for Morrison's coffee than make it at home. Belle moved through the familiar choreography of taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and delivering plates of bacon and eggs with a smile that had become as automatic as breathing. "Belle, sweetheart!" The voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, a regular who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for the senior discount special. "You look tired, dear. Are you taking care of yourself?" The question caught Belle off guard. When was the last time someone in her family had asked her that? She couldn't remember. Her conversations with her father, Robert Torn, had been reduced to brief check-ins about his physical therapy progress and medication schedules. Her stepmother Patricia's calls were exclusively about financial needs or family obligations Belle was apparently failing to meet. "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson, just busy. Are you off to college this fall?" Belle refilled the elderly woman's coffee cup. "How was your grandson doing with his baseball season?" "Oh, he made varsity," Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up. "His parents are so proud. You know, Belle, when I was your age, I worked myself to the bone taking care of everyone else. Biggest regret of my life was not taking some time for myself. Promise me you won't make the same mistake."
Belle nodded non-committally, but the words stuck with her as she continued her shift. Taking time for herself felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Every hour not worked was money not earned, and money not earned meant disappointing the people who depended on her. Her phone buzzed during her break. A text from her half-brother, 18-year-old Jake Torn. "Dad needs you to call Patricia about the car insurance. She says it's urgent." Belle stared at the message, feeling a familiar knot form in her stomach. Jake lived at home, had just graduated high school, and spent most of his time playing video games or hanging out with friends. He'd never held a job, never contributed to household expenses, and yet somehow Belle was the one fielding urgent financial requests while scarfing down a granola bar behind the diner's dumpster. She dialed Patricia's number, knowing exactly how the conversation would go. "Belle, thank goodness!" Patricia's voice carried its usual undertone of barely contained panic. "The car insurance premium went up by $200 this month. Something about Jake's age bracket? Can you cover it? We're already stretched so thin with your father's treatments." Belle closed her eyes, calculating quickly. The $200 would drain most of her remaining money until Friday's paycheck from DataCore. "Patricia, I just sent you guys $800 last week for Dad's medication copay. Can't Jake get a part-time job to help with his own insurance?" The silence on the other end was deafening. When Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted to the martyred patience Belle knew too well.
"Belle, honey, Jake is just a kid. He needs to focus on getting ready for community college in the fall. And your father, well, you know how he gets when he's stressed about money. The doctor says stress could trigger another stroke. We can't risk that, can we?" The guilt hit Belle like a physical blow. Her father's first stroke had happened during a particularly difficult financial period, right after he'd lost his job at the manufacturing plant. The doctors had said stress was likely a contributing factor. Ever since, Patricia had wielded that knowledge like a weapon, turning every family financial crisis into a life-or-death situation with Belle as the potential villain. "I'll figure something out," Belle heard herself saying, the words automatic and hollow. "You're an angel, Belle. I don't know what we'd do without you. Oh, and don't forget Jake's graduation party is this Saturday. We're expecting you at 2 o'clock sharp. I know you usually work weekends, but family comes first, right?" Belle looked at her work schedule, mentally calculating the wages she'd lose by missing her Saturday afternoon shift at DataCore. Right, family comes first. After ending the call, Belle sat in the narrow alley behind Morrison's diner, surrounded by the scents of grease and garbage, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt like she mattered to her family, as more than just a source of financial relief. Her memories drifted back to high school, when she'd been the star student, the one with college plans and journalistic ambitions. Her father had been proud then, before the stroke, before the medical bills, before Belle had become less of a daughter and more of a secondary income stream. He used to brag about her grades, her writing awards, her scholarship prospects. Now their conversations consisted mostly of medical updates and requests for money transfers. Belle's phone alarm chimed, signaling the end of her break. She stood up, brushed off her uniform, and prepared to finish the morning shift with the same professional smile that had become her armor against the world. In 4 hours, she'd drive across town to DataCore Solutions, where she'd spend 8 hours inputting data and answering customer service calls for a health insurance company. The irony wasn't lost on her, helping other people navigate their medical coverage, while her own family's medical needs consumed every dollar she earned. As she walked back into Morrison's diner, Marcus looked up from the grill with concern. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Belle managed a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Just family stuff. Nothing I can't handle." But as she picked up her order pad and approached the next table of customers, Belle couldn't shake the feeling that she was disappearing, one day at a time, into a life that belonged to everyone except herself. The comfortable middle-class existence her family maintained in Maple Ridge came at the cost of her own dreams, her own future, her own chance at the life she had once planned. The question Mrs. Henderson had asked echoed in her mind. Are you taking care of yourself? The honest answer was no. Belle Torn was 24 years old, working 3 jobs, living in a studio apartment with a cracked mirror and a refrigerator that contained more condiment packets than actual food.
She hadn't been on a date in over a year, hadn't seen a movie in months, and couldn't remember the last time she'd spent money on something just because she wanted it. But her family was comfortable. Her father's medications were paid for, Jake would start community college debt-free, Patricia could maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to during her marriage to Belle's father, and Belle would keep working, keep sacrificing, keep being the invisible foundation upon which everyone else's stability rested. At least until something changed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The DataCore Solutions office building smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and desperation. Belle pushed through the revolving glass doors at 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes early as always, her diner uniform stuffed into a canvas bag and replaced with the business casual attire required for customer service representatives. The polyester blazer had cost her $30 at a thrift store, but it was worth it to avoid Patricia's lectures about looking professional. Her cubicle on the third floor was identical to 47 others, beige walls, flickering monitor, and a headset that had been sanitized by countless previous users. Belle settled into her chair and logged into the system, preparing for another 8-hour marathon of explaining insurance denials to frustrated callers. "Torn, you've got a call holding on line 3, barked Supervisor Linda Walsh from across the floor. Linda had the unique ability to make every interaction feel like a personal failing on Belle's part. Belle clicked accept and slipped on her headset. "DataCore Solutions, this is Belle speaking. How can I help you today?" "Thank God, finally someone answers," came a frantic voice. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Riverside Medical Center. I've been trying to get authorization for emergency surgery for 3 hours. My patient is coding, and your system keeps denying the pre-authorization." Belle's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up the case file. What she saw made her stomach drop. The patient was a 7-year-old girl who needed immediate appendectomy. The insurance algorithm had flagged it as elective surgery due to a coding error, automatically triggering a denial. "Dr. Chen, I see the issue. Give me 30 seconds to override this authorization. The surgery is approved, effective immediately." "Bless you." Dr. Chen's relief was palpable. "That little girl's going to be okay because you knew how to fix this." As Belle updated the system, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the satisfaction of making a real difference. Her journalism professors had always talked about the importance of being a voice for the voiceless. In that moment, she'd been exactly that for a terrified 7-year-old girl and her family. The feeling lasted exactly 4 minutes. "Torn, you've got a call holding on line 3, barked Supervisor Linda Walsh from across the floor. Linda had the unique ability to make every interaction feel like a personal failing on Belle's part. Belle clicked accept and slipped on her headset. "DataCore Solutions, this is Belle speaking. How can I help you today?" "That rewrite you just processed, completely unauthorized. You don't have the clearance level to approve emergency surgery authorizations above $50,000. That appendectomy you just greenlit costs $73,000. Belle felt the blood drain from her face. "Linda, it was a 7-year-old girl. She was dying. The system had a coding error that's not your call to make." Linda's voice was ice cold. "We have protocols for a reason. You should have escalated to a level 3 supervisor." "The level 3 supervisors were all in meetings. I called the override line 3 times and got voicemail. That child couldn't wait for bureaucracy." Linda leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Belle, you've been walking on thin ice here for months, missing shifts for family emergencies, requesting schedule changes, and now this blatant insubordination. I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go." The words hit Belle like a physical blow. "Let me go? Linda, I've never missed a shift without proper notice. My customer satisfaction ratings are in the top 10%. I just saved a child's life." "You cost this company $73,000 in unauthorized claims. That's grounds for immediate termination." Linda slid a termination letter across the table. "Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file minus the cost of your uniform cleaning." Belle stared at the letter, the words blurring, as the reality of her situation crashed down around her. Without the DataCore job, she'd lose nearly $1,800 in monthly income. The diner and cleaning jobs alone wouldn't cover her family's expenses, let alone her own rent. "This is wrong, and you know it," Belle said, her voice steadier than she felt.
What's wrong is an employee who thinks she knows better than company policy. Clean out your desk. The escort through the office was a blur of curious stares and whispered conversations. Belle packed her few personal items, a photo of her and her father from her high school graduation, a motivational quote printout that now felt mockingly optimistic, and the emergency granola bars she kept for busy days.
As she walked to her car in the parking garage, Belle's phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, Belle considered not answering. But decades of conditioning won out. Belle, sweetheart, perfect timing. I just got off the phone with Jake's college counselor. They're offering a summer orientation program that would really help him adjust to campus life. It's only $2,500, and I know it's a lot to ask, but... Patricia, I just got fired. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. When Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted from cheerful manipulation to barely contained panic. Fired? Belle, what did you do? The question hit Belle like a slap. Not, are you okay, or what happened, but an immediate assumption that she had done something wrong. I saved a child's life, Belle said quietly. I authorized an emergency surgery that the system was denying due to a coding error. A 7-year-old girl who was dying? Oh, Belle. Patricia's sigh carried the weight of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. You can't just break rules because you think you know better. Companies have policies for reasons. When are you going to learn that you can't fix everything? Belle sat in her Honda Civic in the parking garage, staring at the concrete wall in front of her, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For 2 years, she'd absorbed every criticism, every guilt trip, every implication that her sacrifices weren't enough. But this moment, being blamed for doing the right thing, for saving a child's life, crystallized something that had been building for months. You're right, Patricia. I can't fix everything. I can't fix Dad's stroke, or the medical bills, or Jake's lack of motivation, or your inability to manage money. And I'm done trying. Belle, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Why don't you come home for dinner tonight? We can figure this out as a family. As a family? Belle laughed, but there was no humor in it. When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? When was the last time any of you showed interest in my life beyond what I could provide financially? That's not fair, Belle. We love you. We appreciate everything you do for us. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I'm not your daughter. I'm your ATM. And a broken one at that, apparently, since I can never do enough. Belle ended the call before Patricia could respond. She sat in the silence of her car, watching office workers walk to their vehicles after normal 8-hour days, heading home to families who didn't see them as financial resources to be managed. For the first time in 2 years, Belle allowed herself to imagine what her life could look like if she stopped carrying everyone else's weight. The journalism scholarship she'd given up, the dreams she'd buried under layers of guilt and obligation, the person she might have become if she'd been allowed to grow instead of just survive. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Mom said you got fired, LOL. Does this mean no summer program money? That sucks. Belle stared at the message, feeling the last threads of her old life snapping one by one. No concern for her well-being, no acknowledgement of her sacrifice, just disappointment that the money stream had been disrupted. She started her car and drove out of the DataCore parking garage, but instead of heading toward her studio apartment or her evening cleaning job, Belle found herself driving toward the interstate. For the first time in years, she had nowhere she had to be, no one immediately demanding her time or money or energy, and in that unexpected freedom, something dangerous began to root. The idea that maybe, just maybe, she deserved better than this.
Belle's Honda Civic had been parked at Riverside Park for 3 hours, but she hadn't moved from the driver's seat. The same park where she used to bring her camera during high school, capturing candid moments for the student newspaper, back when she believed her byline would someday appear in real publications, maybe even the Chicago Tribune. Her phone had buzzed 47 times. Missed calls from Patricia, increasingly frantic voicemails from her father Robert, and text messages from Jake that ranged from confused to annoyed. She'd turned the volume off an hour ago, unable to face another conversation about money, obligations, or her apparent failures as a family member. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was hiding in a public park, the only place she could afford to be alone with her thoughts. Her studio apartment felt suffocating, surrounded by bills and reminders of the life she'd constructed around everyone else's needs. A young mother pushed her toddler on the swing set nearby, the child's delighted squeals cutting through Belle's fog of self-doubt. The woman looked tired but happy, present in the moment with her daughter. Belle wondered when she'd last felt present anywhere, rather than constantly calculating her next shift, her next payment, her next sacrifice. Her phone lit up with an incoming call. Not Patricia this time, but her father's number. Belle hesitated, then answered. "Dad?" "Belle, sweetheart." Robert Torn's voice carried the same gentle tone she remembered from childhood, before the stroke had changed everything. "Patricia told me what happened at your job. Are you all right?" The unexpected concern in his voice nearly broke her resolve. This was the father she remembered, the one who used to review her school newspaper articles and suggest improvements, who had driven her to journalism camp 3 summers in a row. "I'm okay, Dad. Just trying to figure things out." "Come home for dinner tonight. We'll talk through this together, like we used to when you had problems." Belle closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pull of family loyalty warring with her newfound clarity. "Dad, when was the last time we actually talked? Not about medical appointments or bills, but really talked." The silence stretched long enough for Belle to wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I know things have been difficult since my stroke. I never wanted you to give up your dreams to take care of us. But I did give them up, Dad, and now I don't even remember what they were anymore. Your dreams were journalism. You wanted to be an investigative reporter, remember? You said you wanted to give voice to people who couldn't speak for themselves." Belle's throat tightened. "That was a long time ago." "It doesn't have to be. Belle, I may have had a stroke, but I'm not helpless. Patricia and we've gotten too comfortable letting you carry our burdens. That's not fair to you." For a moment, Belle allowed herself to hope that this conversation might lead somewhere different, that maybe her father understood what these past 2 years had cost her. But then she heard Patricia's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. "Robert, ask her about Jake's summer program. The deadline is tomorrow." Belle heard her father sigh, and when he spoke again, his voice had that familiar note of resignation. "Belle, about Jake's college orientation program." "No." The word came out before Belle could stop it. "Sweetheart, I know you're upset about losing your job, but we can't let Jake miss this opportunity because of bad timing. Maybe you could pick up extra shifts at the diner or talk to your cleaning supervisor about—" "Stop, Dad." Belle's voice was firmer now. "I said no." Another long silence. When Robert spoke again, his tone had shifted to something Belle recognized, the careful patience reserved for unreasonable children. "Belle, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but Jake is family. Family takes care of each other. That's what we do." "What you do," Belle corrected, "is take care of Jake. What I do is pay for Jake. There's a difference." "That's not fair. You know we appreciate everything you've done for us." Belle laughed, but it came out hollow. "Do I know that? Because appreciation feels a lot different than 17 missed calls asking for money." She could hear Patricia's voice getting louder in the background, though she couldn't make out the words. Her father covered the phone for a moment, having what sounded like a heated, whispered conversation.
"Belle, your stepmother makes a good point. You're being selfish. This family has been through enough without you adding drama to the situation." The word selfish hit Belle like cold water. 2 years of 18-hour days, sacrificed dreams, and financial stress, and she was being called selfish for saying no to one more demand? "Selfish," Belle repeated slowly. "Dad, do you know that I haven't bought myself a new piece of clothing in 8 months? That I eat granola bars for dinner half the week because I can't afford groceries after sending you money?
That I gave up a full scholarship to State University so I could work 3 jobs to keep your house? Nobody asked you to do that. Robert's voice had turned defensive. You made those choices. Belle felt something crack inside her chest. You're right. I made those choices. And I'm about to make another one. Belle, wait! She ended the call and immediately turned off her phone. The park had grown quieter as evening approached, families heading home for dinner and homework help, and the normal rhythms of life that Belle had forgotten existed. She drove to Morrison's diner, not for her shift, she wasn't scheduled until tomorrow, but because it was the only place that felt like neutral ground. Marcus was just finishing the dinner prep when she walked through the back door. Belle, you're not on tonight. Everything okay? She sat down heavily on one of the prep stools, suddenly exhausted. Marcus, can I ask you something? How did you know when Elena was ready to leave home for college? Marcus looked up from chopping onions, surprised by the question. When she stopped asking for permission to live her own life, I guess. Why? I think I just stopped asking for permission. Marcus studied her face with the intuition of someone who'd raised a daughter on his own. What happened? Belle told him about DataCore, about the phone calls, about her father's reaction. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. You know what the difference is between me and your family, Marcus said when she finished? When Elena needed money for college applications, I picked up extra shifts. I didn't ask my other daughter to sacrifice her future to pay for it. You don't have another daughter. Exactly. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron. Belle, what would you do if you didn't have to take care of everyone else? The question hung in the air between them. Belle realized she hadn't considered it in so long that she'd forgotten how to imagine a life that belonged only to her. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe it's time to find out. Belle left the diner as the sun was setting, her phone still turned off, her mind quieter than it had been in months. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The uncertainty should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in years.
Belle woke up on Saturday morning to silence. No buzzing phone, no urgent voicemails, no crisis demanding her immediate attention. She'd slept for 9 straight hours, the longest stretch in 2 years. Her body felt foreign to her, rested in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Jake's graduation party was today. The party Patricia had insisted she attend. The one Belle had promised to prioritize over her DataCore shift. Except now there was no DataCore shift to miss, and Belle found herself staring at the ceiling of her studio apartment, contemplating the radical act of not showing up. Her phone, still turned off from last night, sat on her nightstand like a dormant bomb. Belle knew the moment she powered it on, the avalanche of guilt and obligation would resume. She left it dark. Instead, she made coffee. Real coffee, not the instant packet she usually grabbed between shifts, and sat by her single window overlooking the alley. For the first time in months, she had nowhere urgent to be. The sensation was so unfamiliar, it felt almost sinful. A knock at her door broke the quiet. Belle's first thought was that Patricia had somehow tracked her down, but when she peered through the peephole, she saw Marcus Rivera holding a bakery box. Marcus, how did you... You gave me your address last Christmas when you needed someone to sign for that package, he said, offering a gentle smile. I brought pasteles, Elena's grandmother's recipe. Figured you might need some real food that isn't from a vending machine. Belle let him in, grateful for company that didn't come with a price tag attached. Marcus looked around her sparse apartment, the card table serving as both desk and dining room, the air mattress she'd never upgraded to a real bed, the milk crates functioning as furniture. Belle, how long have you been living like this? She followed his gaze, seeing her living situation through his eyes for the first time in months. It's temporary. I just needed something affordable so I could help my family until Dad got back on his feet. That was 2 years ago. The words hung between them.
Belle had been telling herself it was temporary for so long that she'd stopped noticing how temporary had become permanent, how survival had become her entire existence. "I brought you something else," Marcus said, pulling a folded newspaper from his jacket. "The community college where Elena's starting, they have a journalism program. Applications for fall semester are still open." Belle took the newspaper with trembling hands. The program description mentioned internships with local papers, digital media courses, and transfer agreements with four-year universities. Everything she'd given up, repackaged for a different timeline. "Marcus, I can't. Even community college costs money I don't have, and without the DataCore job..." What if money wasn't the issue? Belle looked up at him, confused. Marcus settled into the one actual chair in her apartment, his expression serious. "Elena's been working as a tutor for high school kids, makes decent money, and she's home by 6 every night. She's got her whole life planned out. College, internship, maybe graduate school. You know what she told me last week?" Belle shook her head. "She said she feels sorry for adults who gave up their dreams because they thought they had to. Said it seems like the saddest thing in the world." The words hit Belle harder than any Patricia's guilt trips ever had. She thought about the 7-year-old girl whose life she'd saved at DataCore, how certain she felt in that moment that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. When had she last felt that certainty about her own life? "What are you saying, Marcus?"
I'm saying Elena needs a roommate for her apartment near campus. Split rent would be $400 a month each. I'm saying the diner has been looking for a weekend manager, which pays better and has actual benefits. I'm saying maybe it's time to stop asking permission to live your life. Belle stared at the newspaper, afraid to hope. What about my family? My dad's medical bills, Jake's college. What about them? Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Belle, your family managed before you became their personal ATM. They'll figure it out again. You don't understand. If I stop helping, Dad could get stressed and have another stroke. Patricia says a lot of things, but has a doctor actually told you that your father will die if you don't bankrupt yourself keeping him comfortable? Belle opened her mouth to say yes, then realized she couldn't. All the medical warnings about stress had come filtered through Patricia, weaponized and deployed whenever Belle showed signs of resistance. "I need to think about this." "Of course you do." "But Belle," Marcus stood up, heading toward the door. "Jake's graduation party is today, right? Maybe instead of going, you could come meet Elena's roommate. She's visiting this afternoon to see the apartment." After Marcus left, Belle sat with the newspaper in her lap, reading and rereading the journalism program requirements. The application deadline was in 2 weeks. She could take evening classes while working at the diner, graduate in 2 years, transfer to finish her bachelor's degree. It was a path back to the life she'd abandoned, longer and more winding than the original route, but still possible. Her phone remained off, but Belle could imagine the messages accumulating. Patricia's panic about her absence from the graduation party, Robert's disappointment, Jake's entitled outrage that his big day might be disrupted by Belle's selfishness. For the first time, Belle tried to imagine their reactions if she told them she was going back to school. Patricia would immediately calculate the lost income. Robert would worry about the family's financial stability. Jake would probably ask who was going to pay for his textbooks if Belle was buying her own. None of them would ask if she was happy about it. Belle walked to her closet and pulled out the acceptance letter from State University, still creased from being folded and unfolded countless times in her first months of working. The paper was yellowed now, the letterhead slightly faded, but the words were still clear. "We are pleased to offer you admission with a full academic scholarship." She had kept it all this time, she realized, because part of her had never fully accepted that this chapter of her life was closed. At 3 o'clock, instead of driving to Maple Ridge for Jake's graduation party, Belle found herself standing outside a sunny, 2-bedroom apartment near the community college campus. Elena Rivera answered the door with the same warm smile as her father,
followed by a young woman with purple-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers. "You must be Belle. I'm Zoe, Elena's friend from art class. Marcus told us you might be interested in the room." The apartment was small but bright, with actual furniture and plants that someone had bothered to keep alive. The second bedroom had a window that faced east, perfect for morning light. She could imagine setting up a desk there, spreading out textbooks, maybe even writing again. "What do you think?" Elena asked. Belle looked around the space, at the possibility it represented, at the life that could begin here, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I think I'd like to fill out an application." The commitment felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time in 2 years, Belle was choosing her own future instead of just surviving everyone else's present.
3 weeks had passed since Belle moved into the apartment with Elena and Zoe, and she was still adjusting to the strange concept of roommates who asked about her day without expecting anything in return. The community college acceptance letter was taped to her bedroom wall next to a schedule color-coded by Zoe: green for diner shifts, blue for classes, purple for study time. Belle's first journalism class met every Tuesday and Thursday evening in a classroom that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Professor Janet Liu was nothing like Belle had expected, a former investigative reporter for the Seattle Times who'd left big city journalism to teach the next generation how to ask the right questions. "Good storytelling," Professor Liu announced to the class of 15 students, "starts with understanding that everyone has a story worth telling. Your assignment this week is to interview someone whose voice isn't usually heard. Not celebrities, not politicians, not your friends. Find someone invisible and make them visible." Belle thought immediately of Carlos Mendoza, the night janitor at Pinnacle Business Complex, where she'd worked her third job. In 18 months of cleaning offices, she'd exchanged maybe 50 words with him, despite working the same building 3 nights a week. He was exactly the kind of person Professor Liu was describing, essential but unnoticed. After class, Belle drove to Pinnacle for what would be her final week of cleaning. She'd given 2 weeks' notice using the weekend manager position at Morrison's diner as her excuse. She hadn't mentioned school to her supervisor, knowing it would raise questions about her priorities that she wasn't ready to answer. Carlos was emptying trash bins on the 14th floor when Belle found him. Up close, she could see he was probably in his 50s, with calloused hands and paint stains on his uniform that suggested he had other work during the day. "Carlos, I'm Belle. I clean the lower floors. Could I ask you a few questions for a school project?" He looked surprised, but nodded. "Sure, but I don't know what I could tell you that's interesting." Belle pulled out the digital recorder she'd bought with her first weekend manager paycheck. "Tell me about your typical day. Start from when you wake up." What emerged over the next hour was a story that made Belle's own struggles seem manageable by comparison. Carlos worked construction from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., picked up his 2 kids from school, helped them with homework, made dinner, then drove to Pinnacle for his night shift. He'd been doing this schedule for 7 years, ever since his wife died, and left him as the sole provider for 8-year-old Maria and 10-year-old Diego. "The hardest part," Carlos said, emptying another trash bin, "isn't the hours. It's missing the school plays and soccer games. Maria had a recital last month, and I couldn't be there because I had to work. She understood, but, you know." Belle thought about Jake's graduation party, how guilty she felt for missing it despite 2 years of missed opportunities with her own life. Carlos had been missing his children's milestones for 7 years, and there was no end in sight. "Have you ever thought about going back to school? Getting training that might lead to better paying work?" Carlos laughed, but not unkindly. "When? Between which job? Besides, who's going to watch Maria and Diego while I'm in class?" Belle conducted 3 more interviews that week, with Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who collected cans from the diner's dumpster to supplement her Social Security, with David Park, a veteran who'd been homeless for 2 years despite having an engineering degree, and with Aisha Williams, a single mother working 2 retail jobs while studying for her GED online. Each conversation revealed layers of complexity that Belle had never considered. Mrs. Chen had been a chemistry professor in China before immigrating at age 65.
David's homelessness had started with untreated PTSD and spiraled through a series of systems that were supposed to help, but mostly just processed him from one program to another. Aisha was one failed exam away from qualifying for better jobs, but couldn't afford the time off work to retake the test.
"These are excellent," Professor Liu said when Belle submitted her interview transcripts. "You have a natural ability to get people to trust you with their stories. That's not something that can be taught." The praise felt different from the perfunctory "good job" she received at the diner, or the absence of complaints that passed for approval at her cleaning job. This felt like recognition of something real, something that mattered beyond the immediate transaction. Belle's new routine was exhausting in a completely different way than her old life had been. Instead of mindless drudgery punctuated by financial panic, she was tired from learning, from thinking, from engaging with ideas that challenged her assumptions about the world. She fell asleep reading journalism ethics textbooks and woke up with story ideas half-formed in her mind. The guilt about her family had settled into a dull background ache, rather than the sharp panic it had been initially. She'd finally turned her phone back on after the first week, finding 43 missed calls and a series of voicemails that escalated from concern to anger to resignation. Patricia's final message had been coldly formal. "Belle, your father and I have decided that if you're too selfish to be part of this family, we'll stop expecting you to act like one." The words had stung, but they'd also been oddly liberating. For the first time, Belle wasn't walking on eggshells, constantly braced for the next crisis that would require her intervention. Jake had apparently found summer work at a grocery store to pay for his own college orientation program. Robert had contacted Medicare about additional prescription coverage. The family was functioning without her constant financial input, exactly as Marcus had predicted they would. Elena had become an unexpected source of wisdom about family dynamics. Unlike Belle, who'd been raised to believe that love meant sacrifice, Elena had grown up understanding that love meant wanting the best for each other, even when that was difficult. "My dad could have kept me home to help with expenses," Elena explained one evening as they studied together at the kitchen table. "He was working 60-hour weeks when I was in high school, but he knew that my success would be better for both of us in the long run, so he encouraged me to focus on school instead of getting a job." Belle tried to imagine Patricia or Robert making that calculation, prioritizing her long-term success over their immediate comfort. The mental exercise felt like trying to picture herself with wings. It's not too late, to have a family that supports your dreams instead of consuming them. Belle glanced at her journalism notes scattered across the table alongside Elena's homework and Zoe's art supplies. The apartment hummed with the productive energy of 3 young women building their futures, supporting each other's ambitions instead of competing for resources. For the first time since high school, Belle felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The learning phase wasn't just about journalism or college credits. It was about discovering who she could become when she stopped being defined by what everyone else needed from her. The person emerging from that discovery was someone Belle was excited to meet.
Belle's confidence in her new life shattered on a Tuesday morning in October when Marcus called her at 6:47 a.m., his voice tight with worry. "Belle, I need you to come to the diner early today. There's been an incident." She arrived to find 2 police cars in the parking lot and Marcus standing outside with Detective Ray Castellanos, a frequent customer who usually ordered black coffee and wheat toast. The detective's expression was grim as he approached Belle. "Miss Torn, we need to ask you some questions about your cleaning work at Pinnacle Business Complex." Belle's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "There's been a significant theft from one of the offices you had access to, confidential client files, computer equipment, and approximately $30,000 in cash from a safe." The words didn't make sense at first. Belle stared at Detective Castellanos, trying to process the implication. "You think I stole from Pinnacle?" "We're investigating all employees who had access to the affected offices. Your former supervisor, Linda Walsh, from DataCore, provided us with some concerning information about your employment history." The mention of Linda's name sent ice through Belle's veins. What kind of information? She indicated you had financial difficulties and had been let go for unauthorized activities. She suggested we look into your current circumstances. Belle felt the careful foundation of her new life beginning to crack. Detective Castellanos, I've never stolen anything in my life. I left Pinnacle 3 weeks ago. I haven't been back since. We'll need you to come to the station for formal questioning. And Miss Torn, you might want to contact a lawyer. The next 6 hours were a nightmare of fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms, repeated questions, and the slowly dawning realization that someone was deliberately trying to destroy her. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Her key card had been used to access the building the night of the theft, security footage showed someone matching her general description, and Linda's testimony painted her as desperate and untrustworthy. I was at home studying that night. My roommates can verify that. Your roommates, who you've known for less than a month, people you met through a friend, that's not exactly an unbiased alibi. Belle's public defender, a harried young man named Tom Brennan, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, leaned over to whisper. They're offering a plea deal. Restitution in community service, no jail time if you admit to taking the cash. I didn't take anything, Belle said firmly. I won't confess to something I didn't do. By the time Belle was released pending further investigation, news of her arrest had somehow reached Patricia. Her stepmother was waiting in the police station parking lot, her face a mixture of triumph and manufactured concern. Oh, Belle, Patricia said, approaching with the kind of slow, deliberate sympathy reserved for funerals. I just heard. Your poor father is beside himself with worry. Belle was too emotionally drained to engage with Patricia's manipulation. What are you doing here? We came as soon as we heard. Jake is in the car with your father. We wanted to offer our support during this difficult time. Through the windshield of Patricia's SUV, Belle could see Robert in the passenger seat, looking frail and confused. Jake was in the back, staring at his phone with the studied indifference he'd perfected over the years. Your father thinks you should come home. Just until this legal trouble gets sorted out. You could have your old room back and we could all be a family again. The offer hung in the air like a trap disguised as salvation. Belle could picture it perfectly, moving back to Maple Ridge, abandoning school, returning to the financial servitude that had defined her life for 2 years. Patricia would frame it as concern, but Belle understood the real message. This was what happened when she tried to build an independent life.
No, Belle said quietly. Patricia's expression shifted, the manufactured sympathy giving way to something harder. Belle, you're facing criminal charges. You need family support right now, not whatever fantasy life you've constructed with these stranger roommates. They're not strangers. They're friends. Friends who've known you for a month? Belle, be realistic. When this gets difficult, and it will get very difficult, those people will disappear. But family? Family stays. Belle thought about Elena helping her practice interview techniques, about Zoe driving her to campus when her car wouldn't start, about Marcus vouching for her character to the police, despite the potential damage to his own reputation. None of them had asked for anything in return. None of them had made their support conditional on her continued financial contributions. You're right about one thing, Belle said finally. This will get difficult, but I'm not running away from the life I've built. Patricia's mask slipped completely. The life you've built? Belle, you're a college dropout, working at a diner, living with strangers, and now you're facing theft charges. What exactly have you built? The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Belle felt the familiar shame rising in her chest, the voice that whispered she was foolish to think she deserved better than the role of family ATM. But then she remembered Carlos Mendoza, the night janitor whose story she'd told with such care. She thought about Mrs. Chen, collecting cans to survive while maintaining her dignity. She remembered David Park, rebuilding his life one small step at a time, despite a system designed to keep him invisible. I've built a life where I matter, where my dreams are worth pursuing and my voice is worth hearing. where people care about my well-being instead of just my usefulness." Patricia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Your dreams? Belle, you're about to be charged with theft. Your journalism career is over before it started. No respectable publication will hire someone with a criminal record." The statement hit Belle like a physical blow, because it might be true. Even if she was eventually cleared of the charges, the suspicion would follow her. Professor Liu had talked about the importance of credibility in journalism, about how a reporter's reputation was their most valuable asset. Belle watched Patricia's SUV drive away, leaving her alone in the police station parking lot with her phone battery dead and no clear path forward. For the first time since leaving her family's financial orbit, she felt truly isolated. Her new life, which had seemed so solid just that morning, now felt as fragile as paper in the rain. The confidence she'd built through small successes in school and work had evaporated, replaced by the familiar weight of uncertainty and fear. But as Belle started the long walk home, she realized something had fundamentally changed. 2 months ago, she would have called Patricia back, accepted the offer to return home, and surrendered to the safety of familiar dysfunction. Now, even facing the possibility of criminal charges and career destruction, the thought of going back felt like death. Whatever came next, Belle was committed to facing it as herself, not as the person her family needed her to be.
3 months after her arrest, Belle sat in the offices of the Riverside Herald, staring at her byline on the front page of the weekly newspaper. The headline read, "Corporate Retaliation: How DataCore Solutions Weaponized the Justice System Against a Whistleblower." The investigation that had started as Belle's desperate attempt to clear her name had evolved into something far more significant. What she'd uncovered wasn't just proof of her innocence. It was evidence of a systematic pattern of corporate misconduct that had been hiding in plain sight. Editor-in-Chief Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades separating truth from spin, leaned back in her chair with satisfaction. "Belle, this is the kind of journalism that changes things. 3 other former DataCore employees have come forward since your story broke. The State Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation into the company's practices." The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Carlos Mendoza, the night janitor whose story Belle had featured in her first journalism assignment, had contacted her 2 weeks into her legal nightmare. He'd been working at DataCore's headquarters and had overheard Linda Walsh bragging to another supervisor about teaching that self-righteous girl a lesson. "She said you cost the company money, so she was going to cost you everything," Carlos had explained, his voice tight with anger. "I recorded it on my phone. I've seen too many good people destroyed by powerful people who think they can get away with anything." The recording had been the key that unlocked everything else. Belle's public defender had used it to get the charges dropped, but Belle had realized the story was bigger than her personal vindication. With Professor Liu's guidance and Carlos's continued cooperation, she'd traced a pattern of retaliation that extended far beyond her own case. DataCore had systematically targeted employees who challenged company policies, filed complaints, or reported safety violations. Linda Walsh had been the architect of a scheme that used false accusations, manufactured evidence, and strategic character assassination to silence whistleblowers. Belle's case was just the most recent in a string of similar incidents dating back 5 years. The courage it took to pursue this story while facing criminal charges yourself, that's what separates real journalists from people who just report press releases. You could have taken the easy way out, accepted that plea deal, moved on with your life. Instead, you chose to fight back. Belle thought about the nights she'd spent in the newspaper's archive, cross-referencing court records and employment files, while her own legal fees mounted. Elena and Zoe had helped however they could. Elena with her psychology training to understand manipulation tactics, Zoe with her artistic eye for patterns in visual data. Marcus had provided both emotional support and practical assistance, using his network of service industry workers to identify other DataCore targets. The community that had rallied around Belle wasn't the family she'd been born into, but it was the family she'd chosen. And unlike her blood relatives, they'd supported her dreams, instead of consuming them. "There's something else," Maria said, sliding a folder across her desk. "The story has attracted attention from some larger publications. The Chicago Tribune wants to interview you about corporate whistleblower protection. And there's this." Belle opened the folder to find a letter from the State University journalism program. They were offering her a full scholarship to complete her bachelor's degree, with a guarantee of paid internship placement at a major metropolitan newspaper. "After everything that's happened," Belle said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I almost can't believe it's real." "Believe it! You've earned every bit of this success." Maria's expression grew more serious. "Belle, I need to ask, have you heard from your family since the story broke?" Belle's phone had buzzed constantly since the Herald's expose went viral. Reporters wanting interviews, advocacy organizations seeking her involvement, job offers from news outlets she'd only dreamed of working for. But notably absent from the flood of messages were any from Maple Ridge. She'd driven past her father's house the previous weekend just to see it. The lawn was overgrown, and Jake's old car was parked in the driveway next to a for sale sign that looked like it had been there for weeks. Through the kitchen window, she'd glimpsed Patricia on the phone, gesturing animatedly at what looked like bills spread across the table.
Belle had felt a pang of the old guilt, the ingrained response to seeing her family struggle. But the emotion had passed quickly, replaced by a clarity she'd never experienced before. Their struggles were not her responsibility. Their choices, to live beyond their means, to refuse Jake's offers to get a job, and to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, belonged to them. "No," Belle said finally, "I haven't heard from them." "Do you regret that?" Belle considered the question seriously. She thought about Jake, probably working at the grocery store and complaining about every shift, about Robert, who might be genuinely proud of her success if Patricia would let him express it, about Patricia herself, who had mistaken love for control and support for servitude. "I regret that they can't be happy for me, but I don't regret choosing my own life over theirs." Maria nodded with understanding. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint the people who would keep you small." That evening, Belle sat in her apartment with Elena and Zoe, celebrating with Chinese takeout and the bottle of champagne Elena's father had sent to mark Belle's journalism success. The acceptance letter from State University lay on the coffee table next to newspaper clippings and congratulatory messages from classmates. "So what's next?" Zoe asked, refilling Belle's glass. "Chicago Tribune, State University, or something else entirely?" Belle looked around the apartment that had become her first real home. The walls were covered with Zoe's artwork, Elena's academic achievements, and now Belle's published articles. It was a testament to 3 young women who'd refused to let circumstances define their futures. "All of it," Belle said with a confidence that surprised her. "I'm going to finish my degree, take the Tribune internship, and keep telling stories that matter. And I'm going to do it all as myself, not as who someone else needs me to be." Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw you on the evening news. Elena's grandmother says you're welcome at Sunday dinner anytime. We're proud of you, mija." Belle smiled, thinking about how different this felt from her family's conditional pride. Marcus and his family celebrated her success without calculating what it meant for them. They were proud of her accomplishments without feeling threatened by her independence. As she looked at her reflection in the apartment window, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: a woman who belonged to herself. The scared, exhausted girl who'd worked 3 jobs to maintain other people's comfort was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. Belle Torn had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes loving your family means refusing to let them destroy you. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people who raised you is the courage to live the life they were too afraid to pursue themselves. The girl who had once measured her value by her usefulness to others had become a woman who created value by being authentically herself. And that transformation was worth
every difficult step of the journey. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.